Hello there and welcome to BoBeats, and in today's video we're checking out this new MIDI controller, the Launchpad Pro Mk3. But this isn't just an upgraded MIDI controller, this is actually a standalone hardware sequencer. So with the new Launchpad we have 64 pads, they're velocity sensitive, they have poly aftertouch and aftertouch. So in practice the new Launchpad Pro works sort of like a bridge between Ableton Live and your hardware setup. So you can control Ableton Live with it, but you can also control your external hardware synths using the sequencer and the custom modes where you can set up custom controls for your external synths if you don't want to tweak the knobs from the synths themselves. So let me show you. I have a clip running inside of Ableton, a drum groove, sequenced via Ableton, and now I'm going to bring in sequences that are created on the Launchpad Pro, which are also stored on the unit themselves. So this bass here is a bass sequence that I have programmed on the Launchpad Pro, but it's sequencing a sound from Ableton. Next up, I'm gonna bring in a piano. So this piano is sequenced from the Launchpad Pro, and it's the wave state that I have over here, Korg's new synthesizer playing a piano. And lastly, I brought in the Minilog XD with this little plucky sound. And I can of course stop the sequence inside of Ableton but still have the sequencer running standalone, because this is a standalone hardware sequencer. So this way you could just remove the computer, play your external gear, create sequences on the Launchpad itself, and then when you're happy, you can either just hook it up and use the sequencer together with Ableton, or you could use the print to clip function to send the MIDI into a clip and have Ableton sequence your external gear via the Launchpad Pro because of its MIDI out ports here. So that's pretty handy, I think. So let's talk about some specs of the new hardware sequencer. Basically, there are 4 tracks that you can use to sequence external gear. You have 2 MIDI out ports, and if you need to sequence even more stuff, you could use a MIDI splitter or through box, for example. So you could take one of the signals and split it into multiple ones. And you can of course send them to different MIDI tracks as well. So for each of the sequencer tracks you have 8 patterns. You can select them like this, or you could combine them and create a chain like this. The sequencer itself is 32 steps, and you can set different start and end steps for the sequencer. Another good thing to note is that while I'm powering this from the computer using USB-C, you also get a little power brick, so you can power it from just your normal outlet and have it totally standalone from a computer. Another cool thing is that you have scenes for the sequencer. So here's scene number 1, and you can see that in scene number 1 I'm playing these patterns here, and I can select more patterns if I want to. So for example, for scene 1, if I want 4 patterns playing per track for scene 1, I can do that, and for scene 2 I could have these patterns playing. And I can also chain these scenes together, forming sort of a song. This is all done linearly, so you can't use this as an intro and then jump back to it. So it's all linearly like this. And what about polyphony? Well, per step you have 8 polyphony. And also worth to note is that we have the custom mode where you have 8 different custom settings. Now you can't see anything here because I didn't have access to the components to set this up, but I've done it over on the Launchpad X. It's the same basic principle. Basically, you have 8 different custom mappings that you can set up in order to control, say, external gear, for example, or control something inside of Ableton. So you can set it to CC messages, program change, you can have a chromatic keyboard, and so on. Now, next up, let's talk about how to use the sequencer. You'll be happy to note that you have a ton of space to save your projects. So here we are. I just hit this button here with Shift. I save the project. So now I can go to a new project here. This should be empty. Under sequencer, you're seeing the 32 steps. So let me put down a chord. So now you can see that we have a chord here. If I want to lengthen it, I can actually just hold down the step. And I can, of course, overdub. And if I don't like it, I have a clear over here. So let's program a sequence. Pretty happy with that. Now, one really cool feature is that we can set probabilities. So if I hit probability, I could actually have these notes here, the new melody, only occur a certain percentage of the time if I want to. So when I hold down a step here, you can see that I have a slider to set the probability of this note triggering. And this is per step, so it's not, you can't set it per individual note in a chord, for example, so it's per step. Now you might be wondering, what is this mutation over here? So mutation is similar, something you can set up per step. So if I set, it will mean that it's a probability for a pitch change per step. So since this sequencer here is set to a scales mode, it means that it will randomize the pitch to something within that scale, which you can imagine with probability and with the probabilistic pitch changes, you can imagine that you can create some pretty cool stuff. And talking about what we can set up per step, we also have velocity. So we can set different velocity values here per step. You previously heard me mention scales mode. The sequencer is now set up to scales, and if I hold Shift and press sequencer, we have 3 settings here. One is for drums, one is for scales, and one is for chromatic mode. So for example, if we go to a new sequencer, we use these buttons here to select the sequencer. So let's go to sequencer number 1 here. Sequencer number 1 here is actually set up as, let's see here if I can find the mode where I can see it, like this. This is set up for drums, but it's controlling the bass inside of Ableton at the moment. So if I hold Shift and I press sequencer, I can select scales or chromatic. Let's create a bass line. So I'm gonna select 4 patterns like this. Go back to the sequencer here. want a delay on it. Let me just bring one up inside of Ableton. So let's talk about the pattern settings. In pattern settings, you can set the resolution of the pattern, and you can also set the direction of the pattern. So we could have it go random, for example. Or ping pong, or back and forth, and so on. Next up, let's add some drums. Let's go to another sequencer, shift sequence. Let's set it to the drum version. So here I can just step sequence something. So now is a good time to show you the micro steps. So let's say I want a little ratcheting thing here on the last step. I select the step, hit the kick drum, and add up to 6 micro steps here. As you heard, we didn't get a micro step on the hi-hat that I have here. That's because micro steps are actually per sound and not per whole step. That's why I'm holding down. So we could put a hi-hat on the last step, and on that step put a lot of micro steps. And let's play with the probability here for some steps to get some variation. So we have a little drum groove here. Now let me just print this to clip. And now we have a little clip here with the drum groove. Let me go to, let's see here, the bass line. Let me print that to clip as well. And we of course need to utilize the Minilog XD. Here we have a little sequence. I put in some mutations, some pitch shift probability, and yeah, just some normal probability. And I think we have a cool little groove going. So this is pretty much how you use the Launchpad Pro as sort of a bridge between Ableton and your hardware stuff. You can sequence up to 4 things using the 4 sequencer tracks. You can of course control Ableton at the same time. I'm sure other people will detail that in videos about Ableton. You have a bunch of different settings. You can set step lengths, you can set pattern settings, you can have it go forward, backwards, ping pong, random. You can set the speed as I've showed you, velocity, probability, mutation. I think the mutation together with the probabilities is one of the coolest things. And then we have micro steps, and I really like this feature, the print to clip. It's, as you've seen here I printed a few of the clips. So now I have it inside of Ableton, very quick to keep working with. So basically you could bring this on the go and use as a sequencer, and then if you don't have a computer with you for some reason, you could just bring stuff into Ableton if you want to, or you could just use it standalone. Now it's not the perfect, it's definitely not the perfect hardware sequencer. I think it's meant to be used to enhance the experience with Ableton rather than you go and buying a Launchpad just as a standalone sequencer. So I wouldn't recommend buying it just to get the standalone sequencer, but if you're already an Ableton user, if you like the idea of having a Launchpad Pro, then the hardware sequencer is actually very useful and very cool. So yeah, that was a little bit of a rundown of how to use it and what it does. Thank you so much for watching this video about the Launchpad Pro Mk3. It's a mouthful, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, you can hit the thumbs up, make sure that it works. And yeah, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. You can enable the little bell, so if you click the bell, you get a notification whenever I upload. So thank you for being here. Have a great day. Talk to you later.